from what you were able to find out as you gathered all the information, what happened that day? As far as you have been able to get the documents, and you said that you have had some litigation on the matter, and so how much have you been able to put together as to how this event, this tragic event, transpired?
These two undercover detectives.
Oh, so they were undercover.
Undercover.
And in
plain clothes.
Have you seen how they were dressed? Have you seen pictures
No,
of how
I
they
haven't.
were dressed?
No.
Anyway,
Well, but it's pertinent. You should describe how they were dressed.
they look like thugs. There's no better way to put it. They had on sloppy, oversized T-shirts, jeans.
So they're not coming in suit and tie,
No.
or in clearly identifiable officer
They were
uniform.
not in uniform. They were not in uniform. And it's still, we still haven't even been able to determine whether they had a badge, whether around their neck, or we don't know. We'll never know. Anyway, what we do know is that they drove up, they parked down the street a little ways, they walked up to the house, came to the front door, rang the bell, and nobody answered. And as they were getting ready to leave, they heard some sounds coming from the backyard. So one of the officers walks around to the side of the house and is able to see or hear Christopher in the backyard. So
With the dog.
Christopher was in the backyard with our dog, with our little dog.
And if he'd been out there when they rang the bell, he may not have heard it.
He almost certainly didn't hear it. Anyway, the officer sees Christopher and confronts Christopher and tells him, we're here to arrest you. And initially Christopher is compliant. I mean, the testimony of the officers is that apparently he had a broomstick. I don't know what he was doing with a broomstick. I don't know if he was cleaning up the backyard, but apparently he
But
had...
not unreasonable to be in your backyard with a broom.
Christopher had a broomstick of some sort in his hand. When the officers first approached him, he put the stick down and Christopher backed up. And the officers, one of the officers jumps the fence. I don't know if the officer thought Christopher was backing up to try and escape or get away, but one of the officers jumps the fence and rushes Christopher and tackles him. The other officer, who may not have been as athletic or whatever, for some reason, he can't jump the fence, so he just pulls the fence down. Just pulls the fence down and rushes in to help his partner. So the two of them now are on top of Christopher, just pummeling him. And at this point, our neighbor, our backyard neighbor, fortunately for us, at that time happened to have she let her little dog out of the house because the little dog had to go to the backyard to do some business, and so she heard something going on here in the backyard, and she hears Christopher hollering and telling the officers, what are you doing? This is my house. What are you doing? And so she comes up to the fence to see what's going on.
And she peers over the fence.
And she looks over the fence and she sees these two officers, both of them on Christopher's back, just beating him, pummeling him. And
he's on all fours.
He's face down on all fours. And the officers apparently are trying to grab his hands to pull him behind his back so that they can handcuff him. And then at one point she hears she sees one of the officers remove his sidearm and calmly announce to Christopher, I'm going to shoot you. And so she at that point turns around and rushes into her house to call the police.
To call 911.
To call 911 because she's thinking that Christopher is being mugged by a couple of thugs. And so she rushes into the house, and I don't remember if after she gets to the house or right before she gets to the house, she hears the first two gunshots, And then shortly thereafter, a final gunshot. She does call 911, and the dispatcher assures her that, no, those are not robbers, they are police officers. Just stay.
And they have the situation under control,
Yeah,
stay in the house.
Stay in your house.
But she ran up to their top bedroom to look out from that window to see what else continued to happen.
And she saw that,
Fortunately, that way you have an eyewitness, yes.
she saw that they had shot Christopher, and they were standing over him and not making any attempt to render any assistance. And then a few minutes later, the paramedics show up. More police officers start arriving. The paramedics load Christopher up on the gurney and take him away.
But he was already.
And then more and more officers just start arriving.
So it was 3 shots to the abdomen area, or
Three shots to his back. He was
in the back?
At point blank
in the
range.
back.
Point blank range, in the back.
With one officer sitting
On top of him. Right. So they've got him pinned down. He's not moving anywhere. He's not armed.
Well, hold on.
Oh.
They claim he had a knife.
Yeah.
Apparently, one of the officers may have dropped his handcuffs, and I'm trying to give the officers the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they see the handcuffs partly under Christopher, and so one officer apparently tells the other officer, he's got a knife. Christopher didn't have a knife. He didn't have any weapon of any sort. And then supposedly there was a struggle for the officer's gun, and the other officer, apparently, he says that he felt his partner's life was in danger, and so he pulls his sidearm and presses it to Christopher's back and fires 3 times.
Well, but Stephen, you're confusing it, because it was the guy on top of him that shoots him.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how he, because it was very confusing,
Yeah.
not because I don't think the way he described it, it's just confusing the way it goes down.
Well-
Because I don't understand how the person who's in control of the subject, has him pinned down to the ground, is fearful of his partner standing a few feet away.
No, they were both on top of him.
Oh, they were both
They
on
were-
top.
they were
So you
both-
have 2 people on top of him.
And one of them is pummeling him. One of them is actually beating him quite extensively about the face. And Christopher's ribs were broken. I mean, in a very short amount of time, they were just atrocious. And the guy who claims that Christopher went for his gun was not the guy on top of him, but the guy who's beating him about the head. And Christopher's fingerprints were not on the gun.
Mm-hmm.
His DNA was, but this guy's beating him like crazy, and so he's got Christopher's blood
Sweat
on his
and
hand.
blood, yeah.
And the gun was in pristine condition. So they tried to make an argument that there was a scuffle for the gun. Well, there were no scratches on the gun, and it's concrete out there. So
Concrete and gravel.
had there been any scuffle for
Plus,
the gun?
this was a gun that was still secured, not a gun that had sort of been out and then dropped to the ground, and now there was let's go for it. This was,
That's what the officers claim.
But that's their story.
That's their
And they've
story.
changed their story, 4 times now? They've changed it 4 times. But I think fortunately for Christopher, there was that young lady who did,
eyewitness.
because otherwise... But then, there also was the physical evidence. I think that the injuries to his body...
Broken ribs.
His
and,
body told a story that they just couldn't get around.
That's a massive beating. And all this in 2 minutes. I mean, that's an assault. I mean, to complete all of that in 2 minutes, you've intended to go in there and assault and capture. That's not something that just, all of a sudden, because I've seen your backyard, and it's compact, but most importantly, your border with your neighbors are all these steep rise, areas of gravel and planting that you've done. How in the world could anybody think that, someone's about to flee from, when you're standing at the fence, and they're in this confined location? That just doesn't make any sense either.
None of it makes
None
any
of it
sense.
makes sense.
None of it
Yeah.
makes any sense.
Well, I really appreciate, I know how hard it is to have to just rethink and relive all those details. It's just, I mean, it gets to me just listening to it.